Hello and welcome. My name is Janice B Gordon. I am the co-president of the Professional Speaking Association, that's PSA Southeast. I'm also visiting fellow at Cranfield School of Management, consulting and training in sales teams in key account management and social selling. Now, as a professional speaker, I talk about scaling your sales, but today I'm up close and personal with the lovely Tripp Braden. Hi, Tripp. We've known each other for a number of years now, haven't we?
We have. We go way back. Good morning, Janice. How are you?
I'm overheating, actually. It's 100 degrees in London. We're hotter than you. How can you believe that, really? Unbelievable.
Amazing.
So if I melt away on screen, then hopefully you'll forgive me.
No problem.
So let me introduce you. Tripp. Tripp is an executive coach, IBM Internet of Things Futurist, and like me, a Sage Global business expert. He's founder of the Strategic Performance Partners, and Tripp helps CEOs and their teams to exceed their revenue goals and grow by aligning their business development programs with their corporate strategy. As a business development executive, he managed and led strategic accounts and channels programs for several market information technology and professional services firms. Now, Tripp, I'm just like looking for something. The wind has suddenly come in and everything's just blown away. It's like, I wanted the win, but not quite that much. These programs generated hundreds of millions of dollars in revenues that have led to these organizations really achieving high growth. Now, over the past 8 years, Tripp Braden has become a B2B marketing consultant and coach who translates marketing strategy into action and increases sales revenue. He is responsible for successfully implementing marketing and business development strategies to help his clients grow faster and more profitably. Tripp partners with B2B technology and industry clients, bringing products and services to their Fortune 2000 customers. He works with clients to align and leverage their B2B marketing and sales strategies to increase revenue, profits, and market share. Welcome, Tripp.
What a long introduction. Thank you.
You've done a lot.
I hope so. Yes, it's always great to hear your background. But it's funny because I think we're seeing a lot of changes in the market. And I think this is where our conversation goes today is how does the individual like myself get these clients, and ultimately how do we retain these kind of relationships? Some of my client relationships go back as far as 1986. So, I mean, when you look at those kinds of relationships, it's obviously I'm not the same person today that I was when I started with them, and has their business changed, and how do we meet those new demands?
Yeah, but also you can really leverage that experience. I believe like everything happens for a reason, and everything you take forward with you, and that gives you the breadth of experience.
No, I agree. I think part of what we need to do today as consultants and coaches is we have to keep growing. I mean, I think that's one of the places where you see that people like yourself who've been very successful. You're continually adding new things to your arsenal to talk to clients about. So you're always in front of them providing value and where that needs to be in the specific time frame.
Now, I want to take you back and ask you, what's the one thing you've always taken with you, the thing that's created the biggest impact in your life?
I think because I always go one extra bonus, the first thing I learned is it's very important to learn how to influence other people. I mean, it's not about selling initially. Many of my clients aren't sold. If you ask them, they wouldn't think of me as a sales professional. But what I've learned to do is shape the conversations, influence. And that's probably the one thing I've taken. But my longest term client, I actually sold when I started selling vacuum cleaners, for example, and they ultimately got bought by Berkshire Hathaway, which is my longest term client. And what they taught me early on was specifically how to advocate a position when you have no authority. How do you influence people to take action? And it's really if you look at all my life, there's one common theme throughout it, which is influence. I've been influencing people for 30 years, and I probably will be doing it for 30 more. But every year I have to change a little bit how I do that. And some of this is coming to a conclusion right now is the generational thing. I'm very used to working with much older clients, and now with the Gen Xers and millennials, I have had to learn to change how I communicate with them to be effective as influencer agent in their companies.
I think it's really interesting what you say about you started, kind of door-to-door salesman, but actually the real thing that's the thread through your career has been influencing. And actually sales has come all the way round again in that it's exactly that. It's not about selling. It's about becoming an influencer, having a profile, having something to say, being interesting, and drawing people to you that want to buy from you. Would you agree?
I agree. I think part of our job today is kind of opening and sharing with people ideas, and it will attract certain kinds of people to you. And you have to be aware of who you're looking for, so that when you're communicating, a lot of times when we started our career, it was much more about mass communications to the many. We are now moving into a generation where it's almost one-on-one. When I get on a phone call with somebody, it's really a one-on-one conversation specific to their needs and problems and challenges, and even some inspiration. I think that's the other piece that I've learned over the years, is to provide very much a light in the darkness. If we've got bad economic times, the way to retain your clients is typically to be one of the people who are optimistic.
Brilliant. So, having worked in manufacturing, financial services, healthcare, and software markets, why do you say it's like receiving an MBA? All these industries you've worked with in the past.
Well, I think part of it is an education, and you have to look at it that way. Part of it is understanding the value proposition you're creating right now with clients. And if you look at, I can't keep a job, right? So I keep moving around in industries. So I think part of that is also learning new industries, seeing similarities and where they're at in the evolution. And part of that is, how does the business evolve? And then conducting a conversation where they're at that day, knowing that your vision and helping them to craft that vision longer term. So the MBA part of it is, I've taught it at a graduate level in a number of national programs globally. And part of that's also being on the front end of what's going on. And I think the difference for the MBA, I look at the MBA part of it as bringing new information to the table for clients. They don't have time to get a lot of this information. So if we can make it more concise, we can share some ideas, we can apply it for them. Application and implementation is, one of my clients kiddingly calls me the $1 billion implementer. So you can tell it's a sizable organization. But the whole idea is, it's because I look at things from the point of view of how do we apply it to your business, not is it a great idea. Like key accounts, I think key accounts is a critical element for entrepreneurial success. But how do you present that to someone? And I'd ask you, when you're talking to people on this, how do they respond to you?
Absolutely. You mentioned about millennials. As an executive consultant, now, how do you develop the next generation of high performing teams and entrepreneurial leaders?
Well, it's a great question. And I think part of my job is to shape the conversation, because if you don't have a good relationship with a client for a long time, you need to bring new ideas. And one of the new ideas I'm sharing a lot right now is diversity. And that's just is a whole different concept, especially, I'm not just talking about diversity. I was brought up in a world where diversity to me means economic inclusion. And I also believe that's the other conversation. When I'm talking about high potentials, I'm looking for the best people in the organization. And I'm also looking for the unique stories. So a lot of times early on in careers, people who are of color and diverse, and even women, have different life experiences. And they don't always translate so easily to the corporate dogma, for lack of a better term, in an organization. And so part of my job is to make my clients aware of who's in their team. They may work with them every day, but they don't take a step back enough to say who's in that high potential pool, and what do they need to be the next CEO.
So I remember a few years ago, I wrote for the Market Leadership Journal, which is an incredible online and really, really influential. Now, I know you're a prolific content marketer, and I often see you pulling out things. I think, God, that Tripp is prolific. So I'd really like to understand how you produce content. Do you have a system, a process, a schedule? What is it that you do that you're constantly putting out great content?
That's a great question, and a lot of people want to know the secret of how can I write so much. I write very quickly, and I also look for other ideas. I think I have a process, and part of it is who I pick and partner with. For example, you talked about Sage. I try to align myself with different bigger trends that are going on in my clients. So when I'm talking to a client, I will bring that content back and say, okay, what would my clients want to know more about? So I use Market Leadership Journal, and I have a lot of people like you guest blog. There's a lot of very well-known people who write on that on a regular basis for me, specifically because it gives them a different audience. So my content is really based on whatever I'm doing at that time. I get into a meeting with somebody, they ask a question, it gets my mind thinking, I sit down and write an article, or I call somebody and say, I'm talking to this, and I'm saying, okay, who has great content? So part of it's just really being focused on understanding. Part of my job as a marketer and influencer is let the Market Leadership Journal pick up some of the weight for me. So if I want to talk to clients, let the clients self-identify when I talk about the, this idea of anticipatory partnerships, which got a really big response in Detroit. What does it mean? I don't understand it, Tripp. Can you explain it to me? Which is what I want. I want someone to come to me and say, I'm interested in your ideas, and I'm interested in how you might help me implement them. So I write it. I basically will go into whatever comes along, conversations, meetings. I read an interesting article or a book someone has sent me. I get a lot of books sent to me. And part of that, I got yours, for example. I think part of that is reading them and then saying, okay, what's the nub here? What's the small piece of this that my clients are going to find interesting? And also knowing what a client looks like. I know what my ideal client is. And I don't try to go out and try to attract new clients that don't match that profile.
So who is your ideal client?
My ideal client typically is old, right? But typically my ideal client is somebody who's very good at what they do, but they're really having a hard time communicating that to the market. So part of what I do, a lot of my time is helping the senior executives really have a message that relates better to their client base. And many times, one of the things I learned from Warren Buffett early, and this is now, I've been working with his company since '86, so I have a good handle on him and his teams, is part of it is what you don't do. And so when I look at this, I say, what do I exclude from the picture, not what do I add? So a lot of my work is really winnowing down, helping get the most critical 10% that's going to make 90% of the difference. And that sets me apart from most consultants who tend to come in and want to offer major change without giving an implementable plan to make it happen.
That's interesting. I was having a conversation yesterday about Scale Your Sales and the whole kind of program behind it. And the salespeople know how to sell, and often they're confused, they're challenged by all of the Internet of Things, all of the new things coming at them, and the fact that buyers have so much more experience. So I don't go in and teach a salesperson how to sell. I assume they already know that. The frustration is them not being able to adapt and align their existing skills. So it's about paring it down, but also giving them essential information, essential skills and processes. How can you access decision makers? What are the things you say so that you can then deliver your natural skills, your natural sales ability, but also just turning it around a little bit. So I absolutely agree with you. It's not adding more. I mean, we've got so much stuff coming at us, so much information. Nobody can take any more information. But if you pare it down, then it leaves a bit of space to get, to allow something else in. So I'd agree with that. That's great.
Well, part of it, I think, when you're talking about a salesperson in a key, having been in the job for a number of years, managing really large accounts, part of it's also understanding your client base. I think part of what we have to do is teach people to better understand the agenda. Everyone has a negative charge around agenda. I've had an agenda for 35 years now in the business, and I tend to still have it, and people know what it is when I come in. I think you have to have a shared agenda, and I think you have to figure out where those points converge. And salespeople sometimes get so busy day to day putting out fires, they don't really have a chance to figure out where their clients are at the time, especially in a strategic account or a key account type of work. You really have to understand, you almost have to leverage the fact that you have a stronger network internally many times than your internal clients do. So if you can start to build those things and you start to share that as shares, the other idea I try to get my clients to think about is the idea of sharing information across the channel and across the organization, because a lot of times the people are so busy in different areas. Like one of my clients is IBM, and I know 425 people at IBM. So you
can start your own company.
That's right. That's just about it. So don't say that. They'll be quoting me on that.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
No, I said that.
Right. So, but part of it is, I think that's part of the fun though for me, because I get a call from one of the general managers at the senior level saying, what do you think's going on here? Or what are you seeing overall? They want the 30,000 foot view. So I create that value. Then I have a new person just recently promoted to an executive role. She wants to know a little bit more about how does she influence people like me. So she has a whole different agenda than the person I talked to as a general manager I might have known for maybe 5-10 years at this point. So I think part of it's knowing that, and part of it's customizing your messaging. Part of it, I think we get into the idea of mass production in key account management. And I don't think those go hand in hand very well, but that's what a lot of, now the Cranfield program is really different in that way from many of the programs that are here in North America, for example. It's much about being a great salesperson, super salesperson, instead of how do we influence people. And I think that's one of the things, as you know. Well, what do you think? I mean, you've seen all kinds of programs. I know you've been exposed to the Cranfield program for a number of years. What do you see as the differences from your perspective?
Well, do you know, that's why I talk about strategic key account management and not about sales, because it's all about building relationship. And I think it's interesting what you say about diversity, in that buyers now are millennials, they're younger. And how do you actually communicate with someone that may be 2 generations lower than you, but actually you need to influence? And I think that's really exciting, because actually I'm kind of one of them. I'm kind of bridging all of that, so I can actually understand both perspectives. And I think that's why I can, when I go into sales meetings, then they don't look like me, they look more like you. But you know, I can, because I'm leveraging the two, then it's really easy for me to interpret where they are and actually help them to understand where a lot of their customers are. The industry is really evolving and changing, but I do think that there's certainly an overwhelm. There's so many terms and jargon that's coming out, account-based sales and account-based marketing. How's that different to strategic, sales, strategic marketing? And, and the fact that marketing and sales has to come together. If you're a salesperson, you don't understand marketing. If you're marketing, you don't. There's so much coming at people, and the world has evolved and changed. You may never meet your global customer, so you don't get an opportunity to really understand them. But there are tools and there's mechanisms to build up relationships. I mean, how did we met? You reached out to me online, and I've never met you. In fact, that's really strange, Tripp. I've never met you. It's really funny, but I feel like I know you. I could always ring you up and whatever, and one day I'll turn up at your door.
Yeah. Well, the guards will take you away, but it's okay. Yeah. We have a lot of people showing up at my door.
But it's really strange to think, if we think 5 years ago, to have this kind of relationship, but you've never actually met that person, but you feel you really know them and you know them well. It's kind of pretty mind-blowing, isn't it, really? But these are the kind of relationships, the emotional relationships you need to have with the people you're doing business with, even if it's a buyer-seller relationship.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because you start to look at what's going on. Like we talked about all the industries I work in. The longest term industry I've been working in for a long, long time is financial services. My clients include people like Progressive Insurance, Nationwide Insurance, Geico. So, I mean, I've been in that field for 30 plus years. And what's interesting when you talk about this whole idea of diversity, and I think financial services is a very conservative industry. So they've been very slow to adopt a more even for women, only 20% of women in financial services companies are in the leadership track. And the problem with that is today, over 52% of the population, the largest population target market in the world is women, right? So let's talk about that. When you say it's bigger than India and China combined. Now, so when you start to think about that and you talk about how do I sell to that, and we have an inflection point in business history with the boomers retiring, I think for the small business entrepreneur, and I see this for my own business, I'll be getting much more involved in these kinds of conversations with clients, because I believe women like to buy differently. Women have different expectations. Women want to see people like themselves. I mean, the whole idea that how we go to market typically today is changing, and how we handle that, because there's opportunity out there. I mean, there's an incredible amount of opportunity because people are retiring, and because the new people are coming on board. I have an ironic story that one of my clients had a person, he showed up and discovered that his client for 30 years is retired. And he was surprised, and he had a millennial sitting in the desk, and he said, "Where's Fred?" And Fred is gone. He said, "Fred retired where's Fred? And the millennial finally said, look, I'm the new person. Here's my agenda, kind of laid out for him what she was trying to accomplish. And he said, where's Fred? And finally I got the call because the client, it's $100 million client for this company. And she was so angry at the end. She said, he spoke to me like I was his daughter, which would be okay if he was my father. And I said, subcontext there of how we work with clients is also important. So I picked up the phone and said, look, I'm kind of the mediator. My job is to make you happy. What did I do wrong? What did we do wrong that really offended you? And then she shared the same thing she shared with the other person. I said, so you're telling me this is what your agenda is. She wants to be in charge of global procurement in 5 years. So I said, what if I could bring you someone like that on my team, a high potential, someone who's got that kind of thing, the kind of people we respect here, and someone who has a shared agenda so you guys can work together. She was fantastic. She gave us another order, right? But part of it's understanding that you have to change. And I think it's very hard for someone who's successful. The unsuccessful people change all the time. That's why they don't succeed anymore. That's why they never get successful. But the person who's successful, when you ask them to change, how they approach things. Look, I spent a couple days in a hospital with my buddy who had emergency brain surgery with his 2 millennial daughters. And I have no children. I'm an only, so it was quite an experience. But I learned a lot from them because I started to see how they wanted to be communicated with, how they wanted to talk, what was going on, as much stress that was involved, how they managed stress. We need to teach people. We need to help people understand this is a change. This is transformational. 52% of the world and women are leaders in the world, have no opportunity for a lot of their organizations. But that's a whole different discussion.
I think it's really interesting what you say about industry diversity and having to adapt. And it's curious that B2C and B2B are coming closer together. And women are, 70% of buyers are women in B2C, but that's actually becoming the case in B2B. The percentages are actually going up. So you think of women as buyers, you're absolutely right. The way that they buy is completely different to the way that men buy. And, the emotional triggers that are important in sales. And if you're a traditional man that's been in sales, and probably isn't very emotional with your own wife, it's really difficult for you to translate how you need to communicate with somebody whose triggers are emotional. And that's been well established in B2C for a long, long time. People buy on emotion, and then they use logic to confirm that that's a good decision. But unless you hit the emotional bit, you're not going to get the sale. And that's no different now, whether that's B2C or B2B. And then you've got the diversity, people from all over the world, that's going to change. So I think that, we're going to have more and more of these stories about that. It's not only generational, but it's, cultural, but it's also a gender as well. It's really, really complicated how this is really changing the way that we do business.
Well, it's funny because I think the other piece of this that we're talking about is how men sell. Men sell by analytics. Tom Peters tells a great story about his wife owning a furniture business. And he talks about the fact that the men come in and look at this incredible $10,000 or $5,000 dining room table. And they say, what lathe cut that leg? What's the lathe to cut that? And of course, that's how they buy. They make those kinds of decisions. Now, the woman says, tell me if, the woman comes in and looks at the same table with her husband and says, look, I can see my dinner party. I can see entertaining guests. So I think part of it, and I know you talk about this a lot in your material, is how do we tell stories? What are the stories we need to share with people? And how do we sell through stories? Because that's a whole different style of selling. Now, I come from a very technology-based background, and I think it's very easy to lean on that. But if you want to really be effective as a communicator, as well as an influencer, you have to tell stories. And a lot of times, I think that's the other translation that has to happen. And I think it's going to take some time. I think it's going to take time for men to understand women. I also think,
but men tell stories. They just don't realize they're telling stories. And it's really about bringing what you would do, in the pub, in the bar, what kind of conversations you would have there. well, actually, we just change a few words. Let's kind of have those conversations with the people that you're dealing with in your business. Let's just transfer that into another environment. And then, they're a lot more comfortable.
Well, and that gets back, I think, to the idea of what do you do? I mean, how do you prepare for things? I think part of this is I have a whole arsenal of stories depending on where my client is in the client adoption process, right? So I have different stories at different places to make points so that I know them. I've worked them. I've done them in front of thousands of people and talked about them. And they always get a response. And I think sometimes that's the other thing we have to do is be more practiced. I mean, in some of the things we do, I'm not saying you want to be perfect, but you do have to think more like a speaker sometimes if you hope to engage a larger audience or even an individual in a way that's different. And I think that's the other connectivity that we need to see. And like you and I think I call it projecting personality. I know a lot of people I've never met in person, though I can pick up the phone at any time and say, hey, let's do this. I'm going to be in London. Let's do something. And they'd be there. I think that's a skill. And it's especially a skill if you have, 8, 10 buyers in a strategic, and even a regular key account sale now, 10 to 12 people involved in that decision. How many do you know?
Yeah.
And how do you build
really know?
Right. I mean, so that's the other piece of this is how do we build a bio? How do we understand those kinds of individuals' backgrounds? Where are they coming from? What do they want to do? And are there some shared areas that you can help build consensus with them to help them win?
Absolutely. Now, you did mention IBM. So tell us more about your award for the prestigious IBM Analytics Insider and IBM Internet of Things Futurist Award. And then also you've featured in the World of Watson and IBM Interconnect Global Technology Conference. How did all of this come about?
Well, I think part of it came about simply because a lot of the work I was doing in the field, they saw what they wanted. Part of their influencer program they have is very much focused on figuring out who's really leading a lot of the bigger discussions that are going on for their clients. And clearly with a lot of background in financial services, part of it's positioning though. Part of what with me is, and I've got a lot of awards from Analytica, for example, out of the UK. It's interesting because I think that's all changing. But I think what IBM was looking for, and I've actually kind of staked out a unique position in that market, which is the executive stakeholder. So it's not for the technical bits and bytes person, though I can go there if I needed to. It's really about influencing the executives. For example, I was at the CDO conference, which is 250 of the world's CDOs in financial services came in the one building for 3 days in Boston last year. And I facilitated discussions. I had conversations. I wrote content. IBM was looking for someone who could have that executive level conversation, and that's how they chose me. Now, I also chose them from the point of view I was looking for a large organization to complement my background with Microsoft, and now with Sage. I believe one of the things that make me unique is I'm platform agnostic, and that's kind of hard to find sometimes in a world where a lot of people are very specific to what they do. So the IBM thing came specifically because I was highly visible. I mean, I have 26,000 followers on LinkedIn. I mean, Twitter. My business partner, Dan Burris, has 1 million people on LinkedIn. So, I mean, we have a lot of muscle when it comes to when we start talking about ideas, where to help content create ideas. And that builds buzz, that builds influence.
And I think that's really important. If you about building your profile, you can do it through the content that you deliver, having an opinion, and then you get noticed, not only by your audience, but as an influencer. Now, I wasn't strictly true in telling you that I was also a Sage business global. A Sage global business expert. I'm not global at all. Well, I am. But, from Sage point of view, I'm not. The program started in the UK, and I've been a Sage business expert for, I think, about 3 or 4 years now since it started. But now, because it's so successful, they're growing it. And America, they came to you in America, and you're part of the global program, but it's coming to a country near you. So tell me, Tripp, what do you do as the Sage global business expert?
Part of that is translation, right? I mean, what they want me to do is basically show the similarities between different market spaces. Now, I do UK and North America, so I have a number of countries in that portfolio. Part of what we want to do is to kind of show people similarities. We want to draw people together to understand the similarities of how these technologies work together, because the technologies are getting global. I mean, one of the things that we're talking about is how does the blockchain work, and what do you need to do to have your business ready for blockchain in 2 years or a year from now? So part of Sage's strategy, I think, ultimately was to provide an optimistic view of where technology takes us and help educate people to the skills they need to grow their business. And that's why, to be candid, why I joined the program. I joined it. I had the technology background with Microsoft and IBM and some of these other organizations. What Sage does differently in the global program is really talk about and bringing a bunch of experts to talk about what's going on. And we do it globally. So there's a whole different take on what needs to happen inside organizations. And that's why I think this program is going to take off. And what I've seen so far has been pretty amazing. Just even here in North America, when talking to partners and some of their executives in the field in North America, as it's a new program, I'm reaching out to people, introducing myself. So it's been kind of exciting, but I think that's the whole story, is business is global now, and Sage is reflecting that in this program.
So I've only got a few more questions left because our time is nearly up. But why is it that many of the B2B organizations invest a significant amount in their kind of sales resources, clients and customers, but as you say, they seldom get the sales results they expect?
Well, I think part of it's unclear goals. I mean, part of it is they don't really know what they want, so they don't get what they want. And they don't define them clearly enough to people so they can actually see themselves in the goals. So part of the role has to become more and more focused on what are your outcomes you want. One of the things I try to get my clients to do immediately when I start working with them is, let's put some outcomes on the table. Let's not do strategy, though I've done that. I've done it for some large organizations, including the Department of Defense. But that's not what we're doing here. We're trying to implement and execute. And that's where I think a lot of companies fail, is because they don't really give their own teams what the direction they want to go is. And so the teams are unclear, and when you're unclear in a market like this in a global economy, you're going to get killed ultimately.
Fantastic. So now the last question, well, the nearly last question, is tell us more about your partnering, because you partner with, you're a great networker and you reach out to people. So you're partnering with Dan Burrus, and he is the New York Times and Wall Street Journal best-selling author. I've been connected with him for a number of years. Really great guy. And he wrote Flash Foresight and the Anticipatory Organization. So tell us about that partnering.
Sure. I think part of what I do for Dan and work with Dan is part of it's a relationship. And with a lot of people over the years, I've discovered the people early on who are good. I hired Dan 22 years ago to do a presentation for my company. So I've known Dan a long time. So all my relationships are very long standing. Part of it's also a complementary capability. Dan teaches innovation, and he has a process and a system. So I can bring him into the table with my clients and share him with clients and really make an impact. But part of it is also picking, I hate to say it this way, but it's the way my friends at IBM and Proficient have said in the past, I pick winners. So part of my program is to figure out who the best people are in the world, build relationship through creating value throughout the conversation with you, and then ultimately figure out if there's an opportunity to do business together. And in Dan's case, he had a book coming out last year. By the way, Amazon's bestseller strategy and planning book, new book for last year was Dan's book, Anticipatory Organization. So part of it's selecting your partnerships critically. I mean, if you look at my client selection process, it's pretty rigorous. It doesn't happen overnight. Dan and I worked together for almost 90 days before we even decided to go to the market. We had several conversations, in-depth conversations about his plans and his vision of his company. And I think that's why so many of my clients who are well-known clients like me, because I'm actually doing a lot of the work that they like to see done as a partnership.
Excellent. Excellent. So quick fire questions just to round this up. What's the one thing you haven't done yet?
Haven't got to London yet.
Oh, well, there you go. You're welcome. Hopefully it might cool down a little bit. What are you most passionate about and why?
Well, I'm passionate about teaching people how to be all they can be. I believe I'm in a strength-based model. So I tend to help people achieve what their biggest life goals are. And it's not always about business. I think one of the things that's a misnomer about being an executive coach is there's no life coaching involved in there. I actually believe, and I work with Thomas Leonard, who helped create the coaching movement, that about 80% of what you do as an executive coach is life coaching. So my goal is obviously to help people achieve their greatest potential.
Excellent. Excellent. So if you're on a desert island on your own, what was the one thing you would take with you?
Well, I used to say a book, but now I'm taking my wife. So I guess that's where older and more mature, you decide the things that are important are more important. So I would take my wife if I was only taking one thing with me to.
When you've read a book, though, remember, you can only read it so many times. With your wife is continuous.
She's constantly evolving, yes, and changing. So part of it, and part of it's just that she's a great conversationalist, and I really enjoy being with her.
Yeah, I know.
So.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much for your time. It's been really interesting and stimulating. I know that we can talk for England, so that more people see how brilliant you are, and there's lots to learn from you in the way that you really connect with people, and your profile, but the profile for the people that you work with. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Janice, and look forward to being on a conversation with you soon. And the same for you. I mean, you make some amazing, like I said, with sharing with my audience, it's the fireworks that make people think about what they have to say. Fireworks.
Love that.
I will see you soon.
Take care.